This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's September 1st, 2022. I'm Ross John Fortuné. Recently, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated its guidance on COVID-19 risk and prevention. The new guidelines increase the focus on people making individual decisions about their level of COVID-19 risk. The guidance takes away any requirements to quarantine for those exposed to the virus and de-emphasizes testing asymptomatic people. For federal agencies, the new guidance will mean that testing requirements will be changed for work sites, affecting both contractors and public servants. While there is still litigation being adjudicated about vaccine requirements for both the federal and contracting workforces, the changing nature of the CDC guidelines certainly makes it more difficult for managers and employees to discern the rules. Stephanie Rapp-Tully is a partner and federal employment attorney with Tully Rinckey PLLC's Washington, D.C. office. After a short break, she'll join GovExec Daily to discuss the new CDC guidelines and how they will affect the federal employee vaccine mandate.
When a shiny new technology pops up, when a newly discovered flaw exploits a bedrock legacy system, when Congress and leadership demand modernization but won't provide more resources, when every update is critical, you need analysis that cuts through the noise to tell you exactly what you need to know. Join the Next Gov team as we speak with relevant federal leaders and experts to break down the science, the tech, the policies, and the people behind the latest emerging technologies. Subscribe in the Apple Store, Google Play, or through your favorite podcast platform to make sure you get the latest critical update.
Earlier this month, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced new guidelines regarding COVID-19 safety rules. According to the White House's Safer Federal Workforce Task Force, agencies can now pause asking or requiring current or potential feds to provide information about their vaccination status. Stephanie Rapp-Tully is a partner and federal employment attorney with Tully Rinckey PLLC's Washington, D.C. office. She joins the show now to talk about how the new CDC guidelines will affect the federal employee vaccine mandate. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me again.
So what effects will these new guidelines have on feds and federal offices? And to a lesser extent, what about contractors?
So there's going to be a big impact, and it's probably going to be an impact of stopping a lot of what's going on. As you've seen with the Department of Defense, it's a bit unclear how that's all supposed to go, as has been the case with this entire process since it's been over a year now. We've been talking about this. It's very unclear as to how this is supposed to be implemented because agencies were given agency to kind of implement the president's mandate into their system. And so taking it out and changing that implementation is also going to be inconsistent. And we've seen that while the testing requirements were supposed to stop, I believe it was August 22nd, Department of Defense is still trying to figure out, okay, well, how are they supposed to stop it and what are they supposed to change to? The EEOC has put out guidance as well as to what employers can require and changing that vaccination requirement. Or not the vaccination, the testing requirement. I think the biggest distinction now is there is no distinction between people being vaccinated and people unvaccinated, that everyone is going to be treated the same and that all requirements are going to be spread out equally, regardless of vaccination status. And I think that reflects the CDC's guidance as to, people who are vaccinated can still get sick and probably more importantly, spread COVID. And so I think the change in looking more towards the entirety of the employment force, as instead of breaking it up into vaccinated or unvaccinated, is what is propagating and moving this change across.
Yeah, certainly a lot has been done about the vaccine only approach for some of this, and I think we're seeing that certainly in the CDC guidelines. So there are court fights still pending on this stuff, though they are mostly in the background as you noted, because this is generally just going to put everyone on the same level. Will these guidelines have any impact on the litigation involving the federal employee vaccine mandate?
Unless the administration revokes the mandate, which is the only action I think would have an ultimate impact on the court cases, because then obviously the cases become, a moot point. Unless they do that, no, I don't think so, because this new guidance talks about testing, doesn't talk about the vaccination, the requirement of being vaccinated. That requirement was put on pause because of the litigation. But this issue is centering around testing people who are not vaccinated or testing to come on a work site, and requiring those testings. That is what's being backed off of. But I don't think, as far as I'm aware, there's been nothing with the ultimate mandate that has changed, because it is still being pursued in court. I believe the court date is later in September.
Yeah, the 21st or something, I think, something like that. I know we've covered it a little, and that's certainly going to be, we'll be watching that for sure. But hopefully nothing, who knows what that's going to look like. Then let's sort of talk about the individuals who were in each of their offices or whatever in the center of this. Certainly people got fired, people got suspended, people got disciplined. What do they do now?
Well, it depends on the reasoning for why they were terminated. If they were terminated because they had applied for a religious or medical exemption and were denied and then terminated, that is potentially an EEOC case. If the employee just refused, didn't ask for any sort of exemption, and were consequently terminated or otherwise disciplined, of course, depending on the agency they come from, they could have Merit Systems Protection Board rights. But as is the case for any regulation, government regulation for employees, it's the policy at the time. So if the policy at the time was that you had to get the vaccine and you didn't do it, and even if that policy is revoked or later changed or stopped or the mandates repealed, it's the policy at the time. So unless a court or the Merit Systems Protection Board takes a very unique position that it was invalid from the get-go, and therefore any termination that's based upon it is overruled or overturned, which I honestly don't see happening, then the termination may still stand if it is one of those things that wasn't for an exemption. There could be, of course, religious discrimination or disability discrimination cases out there where those terminations or I guess suspensions or any other discipline could be reversed.
Yeah, I think the sort of backward looking notion of that would be open a door that no one really wants to open legally, because boy, things change a lot when it comes to these kind of rules and just rules. In general, what if someone is suspended right now? I mean, would they, let's say they're on suspension right now because of the wheels of justice took this long. Is this the kind of thing that they can sort of argue for?
They can argue it, of course. And it really does depend on the length of the suspension. If it's a shorter suspension under 14 days, they're going to have less legal recourse than a suspension that's more than 14 days, obviously, because you get board rights. But they can argue it, they can make this claim, but because it's an undecided issue and it is still currently policy, and it matters what the policy is at the time at which the date of incident is. So if someone's being suspended for something that happened in February, which that seems like a long time, but I've seen it, that it takes that long to go through the process to get a suspension issued to an employee, it matters what the rules were in February, not what the rules are right now. So even though most agencies are saying we're going to stop testing procedures or radically change our testing procedures to only really covering very limited groups of people, then, it kind of doesn't matter. Now, if someone is something happens after August 22nd, and then that person gets suspended later, maybe then there's an argument there. I think the DOD is trying to figure that out very quickly because they're in that ballpark of, shoot, are we going against what the new guidance is? or are we trying to implement the guidance? And they need to figure that out pretty quickly.
I mean, I know this isn't really necessarily where the kind of stuff that you would be representing or the people that you were representing, but for managers and stuff across DoD, it's huge. It's everywhere. How are they going to deal with this?
It was a lot like when this thing started. What are managers supposed to do when it's so unclear? And the best advice I can give to a manager is go up the chain. You have to ask your manager. If it's unclear, that it has to go up, and it comes down, from the top. So particularly in, DoD, that's a long way up the chain, most likely. But you got to keep asking. You do your best to follow the policies as you understand them to be. There was a general, maybe hold off on discipline kind of guidance at some point. Certainly with the mandate, all implementation of the mandate, the vaccine mandate, was suspended. But maybe with the testing procedure, since it's unclear, might be a reason to hold off for a minute. If that's the guidance, you're getting. If you're getting guidance that you have to do it, you need to do what you're being ordered to do. So managers are going to be in a tricky position. I understand it is going to be tricky.
Yeah, as you noted, and we've talked about this with you before on the show, this whole thing has been kind of a nightmare for managers because of that, because you're going to have to either get in your people's business when it comes to religion and disability and things like that, which nobody really wants to mess with that or get into people's privacy. But then also, obviously, the lack of clarity from above, I think, is certainly a major problem. No, let's sort of end on this idea about the future. Is CDC just going to keep giving these kind of restrictions their freedom to let them go? And how will the loosening of guidelines affect public servants basically going forward?
I think as we learn more and more, and the CDC learns more and more about the virus, and we're about to enter the fall, and it's being likened. This is my unmedical opinion, but it's being likened to viruses like the flu, right? That change every year. There's adaptations, adjustments. These booster shots are being likened to kind of like flu shots, yearly flu shots. So I think as we, as a society and as the CDC learn more about the virus and how it's going to continue to affect our population, there will be adjustments to what we're doing. And I think, the change has already occurred. This new set of guidance that's come from both the CDC, from the EEOC, all reflects that, all right, we needed to regroup here. We need to figure out what's proper. The CDC's guidance is radically different than what it was a year ago. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The more we learn, the more we know, the more this will change. So, if government employees need to appreciate that this is not a long established concept, that we're still learning about it, and understand that government procedures, regulations, policies, all that can change. Part of government, right? Is it changes really frequently. And some things take a long time to change, and then some things can be changed overnight. So it's just trying to keep updated and talking to your management to make sure you understand what is expected.
Yeah, never has the sort of up the chain and down the chain line of communication been more important than when it comes to this sort of stuff, because like you said, and I'm not a doctor, but I think we have to be very patient with this stuff, and patience is in short supply, understandably, because people are sick or they have to do their work or whatever. But broadly, we're going to learn a lot more, as you said, between now and next month, next year, 5 years, whatever.
Right.
As such, thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortuné. We want to thank Stephanie Rapp-Tully for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcasts@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. We'll talk to you later.